suppose my starting point would be, is I don't disagree with the take on things from Luke or from David. We accept that unions have always been under attack from the media, and also when we have a Conservative government in power, and perhaps even sometimes when we have other governments in power. But I think we do have to go beyond just looking at saying the toxic image is there because the media has created it. And you are battling against the odds in terms of what the media throws at you. I think it was last year's TUC, might have been the year before, where the only story I can remember hitting the headlines was a motion about banning high heels at work, or at least that's how it was reported by the Daily Mail. And I have to say, being 5'1", I was slightly horrified by that, because I'm wearing quite low heels today, but I'm usually sort of tottering around. But of course, it was actually an entirely sensible motion. I think it was from one of the smaller unions, like the Royal Society of Chiropodist or something, and it was saying people shouldn't be forced to wear high heels at work. But of course, it was portrayed in papers like the Daily Mail as health and safety gone mad, and now they want to stop you doing this. And I think even Nadine Dorries came out and started championing women's rights to wear high heels. And that's one of the silliest stories, but you see that repeated on a daily basis with other stories about very serious campaigns that are being fought to protect people's rights at work. And you've now got a government that is absolutely hell-bent on this agenda of what they would describe as cutting red tape, breaking down all this regulation, bonfire the quangos, removing burdens on businesses. And of course, parcelled into all of that is actually things like the minimum wage, like maternity rights, paternity rights, even things like environmental laws they've put up for consideration as examples of over-regulation that could perhaps be scrapped. And as the union's main role is to protect the terms and conditions, protect some of these regulations, these health and safety laws that people have fought so hard for, obviously unions are going to come even more under attack with that agenda. But I think, having said that the odds are weighted against you, in that you've got a government and a media that don't like where the unions are coming from and are prepared to distort it to suit their own purposes, I do think that the unions themselves have to look at what they can do, not just to fight those arguments, but I remember when I first started going to Labour conference, which was, I think my first one was 93, so that's 19 years ago, and it was the year of the OMOV battle, and it was very much seen as, it was on the beach at Brighton, and it was the modernisers, so mods against the rockers, and the dinosaurs being taken on by all these bright young things. And the same discussion was being had then about the union's image and how they could broaden it out and how they could attract a wider base of membership. And I think to an extent they've done that, but they haven't convinced the public that they've done that. People beyond actually the people who are involved in unions and know what union membership's all about. And there is still very much this, when I sort of tweeted about this earlier, the immediate response that came back said they felt that unions were still seen as macho, that it wasn't a welcoming place for women, aggressive, militant, all those sorts of things. And I think there's also this idea that it's not a place which is, unions aren't particularly a place that are receptive and open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. I think there can sometimes be a bit of a difficulty in the fact that because you have collective policy making, as we do in the Labour Party, that can sometimes restrict people from being able to sort of say what they think because you've got a union line on things. What I would say, that I just want to give a couple of examples of where I think unions have worked well in reaching beyond their membership. I think that's probably the one point that I do disagree with Luke on a little bit, in that he was saying the solution is workplace organisation, which I think is fine to an extent, but I'm not sure how many people who work in a big organisation actually get their view of their trade union from seeing their trade union at work. Because if you tend to find that branch meetings aren't that well attended. It's only when a particular problem arises. In some cases, it depends how active the branch is, but in some cases they don't actually have contact with their union unless there's a big problem, unless there's a call for industrial action. So you may well find that people who potentially union members still are getting their impressions of the unions from the media, from the public, rather than from the people who should be talking to them in the workplace. And also, union members, potential union members, as well as being workers, are consumers. And I think it works best when you actually view people in the round rather than just looking at what unions should be talking about, not just fighting for people's terms and conditions at work and protecting their employment, but also about protecting them against everything else this government is doing. Because if you've got a wider government agenda of slash and burn, of cuts left, right and centre, it's not just people's jobs that they should be that they're worrying about, it's everything that affects their standard of living. And if I give one example, we had a rally in Bristol the other day, campaigning against the Liberal Democrats Council's threat to privatise home care workers. And we had this battle about 4 years ago. Labour won some seats in the subsequent election, reversed the decision, lost some seats again, and then the Liberal Democrats got it back in and have now put it back on the agenda. And we had this rally, which was organised by Unite, and Unison were there too, and you had a lot of home care workers came out to support things, but the most powerful speech actually at that rally I felt was from an elderly man whose wife was being looked after by one of the home care workers. And he almost had people in tears saying how much he relied on these women. And he was saying the women that were there as home care workers were absolutely wonderful. But you do have to take it beyond just being about campaigning for those care workers and to stop their jobs being taken away from them. But also, I think, linking it to what those care workers do for the service users is really important. And another example I give, and I had no idea that Nigel was going to be here when I wrote these notes down earlier, but Nigel Costley from Southwest TUC, for those who don't know, was very involved. It was only earlier this year, wasn't it, with the Hands Off Dean campaign against the forest privatisation. Now, I suspect that you live in the Forest of Dean, so I suspect that was partly why Nigel got so involved. But although there was a protecting trade union jobs element in it, in that the Forestry Commission jobs would have been under threat, it was also about so much more than that. And to be honest, if the campaign had just been about we don't want Forestry Commission jobs axed, we would never have managed to force DEFRA to do the U-turn that they did. It had to be about saving our forests, saving our heritage, and the unions actually coming together with ordinary people who are tying yellow ribbons around trees. And there's a fantastic video of it that Nigel showed at the recent event that I went to. So I do think you have to take it beyond the workplace to an extent. And the final example that I will use on that, and then I'll sit down, is I think it's ARC, the civil service union that represents the tax inspectors and the more senior people working at HMRC. And they've lobbied government quite hard, and MPs quite hard, about cuts to their jobs. Because if you're slashing the number of tax inspectors, it's a really, really simple argument that if you've not got people out there trying to identify people who are avoiding tax, you're actually going to lose money in the long run because the revenues aren't coming in. And it's a really, really simple case. But if they go out and campaign on it just as tax inspectors, the public isn't quite going to be won over because, and I say this, my neighbouring MP, a Liberal Democrat, Stephen Williams, was a tax inspector in a former life, which has done even less to endear me to tax inspectors than I was previously. But, if they're just going to campaign as tax inspectors and we want to protect our jobs and we think we're doing a good job and we're value for money, that only gets you so far. But if you actually then take it out to all those organisations like UK Uncut and 38 Degrees and all those that are campaigning and actually bitterly resent the fact that there are wealthy people avoiding tax, whereas other people are having to sort of scrape by and they're having their living standards cut. It's far more powerful if you do actually do that joined up working. And I think that's where the unions do need to go. So it's not just something that is about the workplace, it is something that is out there, that's engaging with other organisations, perhaps isn't too hung up about whether the people that they're working with and supporting are union members in the short term. Because in the longer term, then people will see the value of actually working with the union and perhaps joining the union too.